No. Hey, people. Change was long overdue, what can I say? How can I put this succinctly? 2020 sucks. On top of just everything that's happened this year, we've also suffered some huge losses in the world. A lot of important people left us all too soon. People like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Kobe Bryant, Chadwick Boseman, Alex Trebek, Carl Reiner, Grant Imahara. Lots of unfortunate deaths, and a ton of them were from the music world. In 2020 alone, we lost John Prine, Bill Withers, Little Richard, Charlie Daniels, Riley Gale from Power Trip, Peter Green from Fleetwood Mac, and one of the most heartbreaking of all, legendary guitarist and rock and roll trailblazer, Eddie Van Halen. That one hurt. Anyone who's even come within spitting distance of rock within the past 30-40 years has felt the impact that him and his band had across music as a whole. When they exploded onto the scene with their 1978 debut, the face of music history was changed forever, and they continued to make big, bold, and beautiful strides all throughout their career. With Eddie's signature brand of virtuoso-styled, two-hand tapped guitar riffs carving out their path as they blazed it. But with the band being finally put to rest, and yes, it is being put to rest, people, knock that shit off. It's finally time we got around to this. If you'll allow me, I would love to take the time to show you how to get into Van Halen. Okay, so no lie, this first section is gonna be the absolute easiest because the Van Halen albums you have to hear are legit some of the records that literally rewrote the entire book on heavy music. And if you want to talk about just first impressions, Van Halen made one of the best first impressions ever. Originally formed when a young Eddie Van Halen decided to take up guitar instead of drums because his older brother Alex wouldn't leave his kid alone.
When we kind of swapped, he kind of went, see, you're better at that anyway. You know what I mean? I'm going, yeah, well, you're better at the drums.
Those two got together with family friend Mark Stone on the bass, and they formed the group Genesis in their hometown of Pasadena all the way back in 1972. And then they immediately changed their name after finding out that one was very, very taken. By 1974, the band had replaced Stone with another local singer and bass player named Michael Anthony, changed their name again to simply Van Halen, and hired a full-time singer and Hoosier transplant, Indiana, represent, David Lee Roth. After playing various clubs around LA, making a name for themselves in the burgeoning California metal scene, and even getting the chance to cut a demo with Gene Simmons that, weirdly enough, took them nowhere. Honestly, it's pretty surprising. Hell, Gene was originally going to try and snag them a record deal himself, but he eventually gave up after his management told him that these punk kids from California didn't have a chance of getting anywhere. Yeah, that was a mistake. The band did eventually grab the attention of Warner Records producer Ted Templeman, and in 1977, they eventually signed a deal and spent just under 3 weeks slapping together a debut record. A pretty slapdash record from the sounds of it. The guys basically just banged out 9 songs from their live set, threw a couple of covers in there for shits and giggles, and called it a day. They didn't polish it very much, they didn't add very many overdubs, they didn't even correct a lot of mistakes. The band have said in interviews that they recorded that way simply because they wanted to capture the feel of their live show, but A big part of me just wants to think that Templeman knew what kind of gold he had on his hands and he just wanted to let them make the magic happen. Eventually, though, on February 10th, 1978, the band finally dropped their eponymous self-titled debut, and God damn! Rock and metal changed overnight. Their sound was loud and crazy and dangerous, but also just, well, like an absolute fucking party. The music on this is so high energy and so insanely hook driven, but there's also no mistaking this record for anything else. This is a metal record, through and through. But it's a different kind of metal. This was metal that had the perfect blend of groove and ferocity to satisfy the heavier tastes, but also the perfect amount of melody, swagger, and just plain and simple fun that anyone could get into, even if you didn't listen to metal. You gotta remember what metal generally tended to look like to people in 1978. At this point, the genre wasn't even debatably a decade old yet. And generally, it wasn't thought of as like a fun genre. Not that it didn't have its moments, but the early progenitors of metal, trailblazers like Sabbath, Zeppelin, Deep Purple, a lot of those guys were riffing on blues and psychedelic rock.
Oh, I don't care what in this old world you do.
Neither of which are the sunshiniest of genres out there, you know what I mean? More melodically driven metal would eventually start to blossom out with acts like Alice Cooper, Kiss, Motorhead, AC/DC, and the like, but even then, those bands could still be too much for your average Joe to get into. You know what I mean? They were shocking and provocative. Their music was meant to be unsettling as well as intense, at least to a certain degree. The thing that blows me away about Van Halen 1 is not only how screamingly forceful it is, but also just how it's like a big honkin' party record. Like, it's one of the heaviest records in existence, but
is everybody having a good time so far right here?
You wouldn't call it like scary or freaky or nuts. It's just fun. Seriously, the up-tempo grooves and rhythms from Anthony and Alex, the playful and absolutely slaughtering guitar melodies from Eddie, and David Lee Roth's perfect blend of crass bravado and highfalutin party time swagger make this record almost entirely undeniable. It's the metal record that anybody can get into. This was the album that opened up a lot of doors for people. Metal was, and honestly still can be, very befuddling to people who don't get it. Why on earth would you listen to something so loud and crazy and psychotic? What, are you like a violent psycho? I don't understand. Why? Then you put this record on, and they get it. Oh, okay, so that's why heavy music rules. Oh, okay, I get it. Wow, this absolutely Can I look through your vinyls? Like, ooh, God, what else have you got here? I think that's what I admire so much about this record. It's one of the first metal albums to remove most of the darkness from metal, but still remain an entirely metal record. From skin to core. Up to that point, I think people just thought that wasn't possible. And trust me, there are still plenty of people who say that it isn't. They're real annoying to read comments from. This album basically helped kick off an entire new wave of heavy metal. It allowed the genre to expand and pollinate other genres throughout the rest of the 70s and the 80s. While there were others that certainly came before it and helped pave the way, certainly, I feel like this was the definitive record that finally said, okay, metal can be silly, metal can be fun, metal can be goofy. I want action tonight. It's the final countdown. Could be a mixed blessing. I wouldn't call them a hair metal band, not at all, but every single one of those bands was copying from their template. In more ways than one.
I do cocaine! I do cocaine! I do cocaine.
With cuts like the absolutely dominating Runnin' with the Devil, their blistering cover of the Kinks' You Really Got Me, the savage and sinister Ain't Talking About Love, or the soaring and triumphant Feel Your Love Tonight, this album, cover to cover, is basically flawless. There are very few albums out there I'd say are absolutely perfect, but Van Halen 1, this is scary close. It's super duper crazy close to perfect. I can even give a 5 out of 5 to the one thing I never, ever give 5 out of 5s to. Needless instrumental wank. Look, a lot of artists cannot get away with doing this kind of thing, but if there was one artist on the planet who could, it was Eddie Van motherfucking Halen. Alright? If there's any Van Halen record I just have to insist you spin, it's gotta be this one. Almost every other Van Halen record builds off the template that this masterpiece helped set up, and if you want to get your bearing with the band, this is the record that you put on. It absolutely, positively rules. And you know, I feel like when discussion of Van Halen 1 comes up, a lot of people also like to lump in Van Halen 2 when they celebrate these two albums. And while I do love this album, and we will get to it eventually, don't worry, I feel like this particular part of the video I need to make as sort of a public service announcement. People, Women and Children First is a fucking glorious record, and I never hear anyone talk about it. Why on earth don't y'all talk more about Women and Children First? I can't sit around and tolerate that. I can't. I'm sorry, but I can't. I mean, have you seen Junior's Grave? Now, remember what I said about Van Halen 1 being a metal record that wasn't particularly dark or menacing and all that? Well, even back in the day, there was a small contingency of people that said Van Halen didn't even count as metal. A contingency that still exists to this day, but Jesus, people, at this point, yeah, that's fighting a losing battle. Let it go, little sunflower, let it go! But hey, if you absolutely wanted to, you could potentially argue that for a heavy band, Van Halen kinda lacked teeth. With Women and Children First, though, they corrected that issue with a vengeance. This record is probably the rawest, grittiest, most outright raucous thing they ever made. It opens with the gigantic 1-2 punch of And the Cradle Will Rock and the arena rock staple Everybody Wants Some, and then just never lets up from there. Romeo, Delight, and Loss of Control are almost punk with their speed and brutality. These songs border on Motorhead, and it fucking rules. And even towards the end of the album, when Eddie breaks out the acoustics for stuff like Take Your Whiskey Home and Could This Be Magic, the vibe never starts crawling. It just becomes a different kind of intensity. Those moments are where the album almost goes full Zeppelin, and it just about gets there with the smashing closer in a simple rhyme. Overall, this is one of my personal faves from the David Lee Roth era, and the definitive answer to the question, does this band even count as metal? Yeah, one spin of this record, that usually shuts everybody in the room up. But then again, maybe that's why this album tends to be forgotten by people. As much as I love this record, I also got to admit, a lot of the songs from this one, okay, maybe they don't necessarily work well as like singles. In order to achieve that heavier sound, the band did drastically ease up on the pop appeal that their first two records had. And while critics were generally really nice to this one, the label didn't seem as enthusiastic. They barely promoted this particular album. It only had one official single, and Everybody Wants Some only started gaining traffic after people heralded it as a live staple. Yeah, that particular track, as celebrated as it is today, only got recognized in hindsight. At the time of its release, this poor thing just did not get a lot of love. It's honestly a bit of an oddball in the general Van Halen catalog. Throughout the rest of their career, when Van Halen would expand and grow and try new things, it would more often than not be in a poppy or more soft-edged direction. The band didn't often knuckle down, but man, when they did, they really just knuckled the fuck down, and it ruled, people. This record has some of Eddie's most ambitious licks, some of Michael Anthony's most intricate and colorful bass work, and Alex has an absolute field day on this album. I feel like a lot of super fans out there know how legit this record is. Like, if you know your Van Halen, you know this is not one you skip on. But it gets overlooked by more mainstream outlets, and god damn it, it really shouldn't. If a band is big and noteworthy and influential as Van Halen can have something like a hidden gem in their catalog, I would definitely say it's this. This is one you need to dig up just to understand how crazy versatile they were capable of being, even at this early stage of their career. And those of you that are mad that we're not talking about Van Halen 2 yet, look, we'll get to it, I promise. Stop booing. But people, women and children first, that was just the first step in their growth. This was a real turning point for them. This made them more than just an kick-ass boogie-woogie band. They would keep growing and developing their sound and trying lots of cool new things. Though it certainly wasn't without, conflict. As the years went on, tensions would continue to mount, and clashes in personality, taste, and style would start rearing their head. One of the big ones being Eddie's desire to break outside of the bounds of guitar. Eddie became way more interested in incorporating synths and other musical instruments and soundscapes into the Van Halen sound. Whereas David Lee Roth and manager Ted Templeman had more of a don't fuck with the formula kind of approach. As the years went on, Eddie got sick of making concessions with them time and time again, and eventually he began work on his own studio, which he named 5150 after the California law code for someone causing a ruckus due to a mental illness. Maybe a little tacky in hindsight, but Eddie meant it as mostly just a goofy little "we going crazy in here" kinda dad joke kinda. I don't know what to tell you, the 80s were different, people. While he was building the studio, though, he had a lot of time to himself, which he used to write music outside of Roth and Templeman's influence, and that really got his interest in writing on synths flaring at full blast. When the time came to finally make the next album in the new studio Eddie had built, he insisted that keyboards have a prominent role on the record. And that's where the compromises finally stopped, and we got 1984. Now, here's the thing about 1984. If there's any album from this era of Van Halen that should have been a disaster, it's this one. They were futzing around with new musical ideas they never really tried before. They were exhausted from an album and tour that their label basically strong-armed them into doing. More on that later. And inner band tensions, particularly between Dave and Eddie, had never been higher. This album had disaster written all over it.
Oh, got it bad, I'm hot the teacher.
And instead, it ended up being one of the best goddamn albums they'd ever make. Like, 1984 is one of the albums you go to when you need an example of turbulent band health that still creates absolutely spellbinding music. It's why when you read articles about a band that make you tug your collar a little bit, you still want to try to give them the benefit of the doubt, because yeah, while Suicide Silence self-titles do happen, like a lot, sometimes, in those rare occasions, that kind of tension can create stuff like 1984, and my god, is it worth it when the music is this bloody good. People, damn. This record is another weird standout in the David Lee Roth era. I mean, it's just so synth heavy and electronic in places. They had dabbled with it in a few places here and there, but they went all in on this record. Stuff like Jump, All Wait, the title track, those huge, bright, blaring synths. It's not a subtle easing into the sound either. You put the needle on and the first thing this record does to you is just... And even though this album certainly plays a lot with electronic elements, the tracks that do still lean into their older guitar-heavy sound, again, some of the best stuff they'd ever write. People like to label this one as the keyboard album, but people forget this is also the record with Panama, with Girls Gone Bad, with Hot for Teacher. Yeah, Hot for Teacher is off of this album, you know. That is off of the keyboard album. But whether you dig the old shred of classic Van Halen, or you like the new electronic direction they were moving in, this record was truly the best of both worlds. Well, not the best of both worlds, we aren't quite there yet, but it's early Van Halen at their most experimental, their most bold, and very arguably their absolute best. There are many, many people who say that this is the greatest Van Halen record, and you know, I completely get it. It's a must-listen album. And again, everything that's led up to this album's creation indicates that it should have been an outright disaster. This should have been a bomb. But this became the moment where Van Halen proved once and for all, you never counted them out. Ever. After you've spun Van Halen 1, I honestly would recommend you jump straight to this one and try it out. One of these two records is likely going to win you over. 1984 is just another near flawless album that works from top to bottom, even though it is something so very different from what they were doing in this stage in their career. It just, again, proves how versatile this band was capable of being. Unfortunately, this would be the album that did eventually end up killing this incarnation of the band. I don't have time to get into the specifics of it in this video. Good lord, that story alone is like a long-ass video in and of itself. But after 1984, Van Halen and David Lee Roth, after years of disagreements and mounting tension and inner turmoil with one another, would finally separate, with Roth finally quitting the band during the 1984 tour. And people just, let me tell you,
we have to have a comparison, then fine. I eat you for breakfast, pal. I eat you and smile.
I win.
Yeah.
I mean, Scotty Ross was the manager, almost had to, because I was ready to, it's like all those years of, were right there. I just said, if you ever speak to me like that again, you better be wearing a cup.
it got ugly. It's one of the most hostile and dramatic band breakups in all of music history, and it was one of the ones that hurt the most too. The band were at an apex when Dave quits, and it's not like he was some fly-by-night journeyman either. Dave had been a crucial element in their sound and identity over the last 10 years. Them losing Dave meant that they were losing a gigantic part of themselves. For any other bands, losing someone as influential and charismatic as David Lee Roth would have been a death blow. Not for Van Halen, though. Now we get to the fun part. There are two distinctive eras in Van Halen's catalog. Well, okay, technically three, but we'll get to it. There's the David Lee Roth years at the beginning, and the Sammy Hagar years after 1984. And to those of you who were tuning in hoping I'd slam the Van Hagar years, I'm sorry, but you will be sadly disappointed. In this house, we got love for Van Hagar. For their next record, 5150, they were gonna need a new singer. And after Eddie got a recommendation from his Lamborghini mechanic of all people, not the first person I'd probably take musical advice from, but he gave you a good tip, so props to the man. The Red Rocker himself quickly scored the gig. Now at the time, he seemed like kind of a weird choice for a replacement. He had been previously known for his work with Montrose, and he had already scored himself several big hits as a solo artist. But, well, I mean, you kinda see it. He's definitely a charismatic dude, but he's also definitely no David Lee Roth. Whatever Van Halen was going to become, it clearly wasn't going to be the same thing that Dave was out there doing. But thankfully, they had something entirely different in mind. With 5150, the band truly became Van Halen Mark II. The difference in tone, scope, and feeling is just completely night and day. There's only a 2-year difference between 5150 and 1984, but you'd swear the band grew up by 10 over the course of one record. It's kind of uncanny. The production is a lot cleaner and much more well-polished. Eddie and Sammy worked together on lyrics that were a bit more thoughtful, introspective, and mature. Though yeah, right from the get-go, they don't want you thinking that they've gotten, like, too mature on you. This band is still silly buggers. But there was definitely a sense of growing up with 5150. You felt a level of maturity on this you just didn't get on the David Lee Roth records. There was also a much broader spectrum of instrumentation implemented on this record. It isn't an album that reinvents the wheel or anything, but it does step outside of the traditional guitar, bass, and drum setup that they had been known for. And again, it proved that the band could do more than everyone assumed they were capable of doing. This was a completely new version of Van Halen, and they made their intentions very known on this album. And oh, well, I told y'all I wasn't gonna hate on Van Hagar here. I love Van Hagar. But, okay, look. In the Sammy years for this era, of the band. I'm sorry, I just gotta be dead blunt honest with you about what this band is once Sammy joins. Once Van Hagar kicks into gear, Van Halen, they basically become a dad band. I know how that maybe sounds to some of y'all, but you just gotta take my word for it here. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but man, the shift in sound is just so dramatic. They stopped being as outwardly silly, and they had more songs about deeper topics like love, life, and society. Look, not always super deep topics, but the effort was present, is what I'm saying here, okay? The Sammy years are when Van Halen started to chill out a little bit, hence dad band. They sound very much like a dad band. I'm sorry, I'm just being honest with you. You got a dad? Chances are he probably loves the shit out of Van Hagar, and I don't blame him. Hi, dads, how's it going? I know you probably don't like me very much, but I'm with y'all. Van Hagar is great stuff. Look, people, just because they become a dad band doesn't mean they become a bad band. It's just different, is all. The Sammy years definitely put out a different kind of vibe, but this album in particular makes a fantastic argument for their existence, especially with the opening track, Good Enough, that progresses into the excellently wonderful Why Can't This Be Love, another ultra synth heavy track. This was the album that showed us that, oh, okay, Van Halen can do ballads too. Who'da thought? There's also the absolutely stampeding Get Up, the epic and soaring Dreams, the blues rocky swagger of Best of Both Worlds, followed immediately by another fantastic ballad, Love Walks In. I mean, to those of you people that aren't necessarily the biggest Van Hagar fans, I'm not trying to dog you here. I get it. This incarnation of Halen is so different from their early years. It's a drastic change for the band. It feels almost like a completely different group. If it's just not your thing, I get that, but this era of the band was still completely valid, even if it wasn't as many people's favorite. Van Hagar may totally end up not being your thing, but you owe it to yourself to at least give it a chance, and 5150 is about as good as this era of the band gets in this regard. This one, as the title track would say, is the best of both worlds. See, we got to that joke eventually. You knew I was gonna make that joke, and we eventually got to people pay me for this. Y'all pay me for this. Love you, boo. You know, plenty of Van Halen fans will tell you with a straight face that their first 6 records with Dave are a perfect streak of albums. All of them are 10 out of 10, not a single flaw out of them, out of all 8 years and all of the albums that we have. 10 out of 10, perfect streak, perfect streak. And look, people, I'm a big Van Halen fan, a huge Van Halen fan. I have 5150 on cassette, and I have David Lee Roth's solo EP. Something's clearly wrong with me. I love this band to tears, but even I gotta just look at you and say, really, dude? Like, nothing is that perfect. And even their stuff with Dave does have its dips, at least here and there. And hot take, Van Halen 2, while it is a fantastic record, it's not perfect. The album is still extremely strong. It's a great amount of fun. It's got that same high-energy boogie and rampant guitar noodly you know and love from the first record, and this one in particular even opens really strongly with their cover of Dee Dee Warwick's You're No Good. That's a fantastic song, a great entry into this band's wonderful cover game. That's followed by major fan favorite Dance the Night Away and the equally fun Somebody Get Me a Doctor. Hey, The Van Halen you know and love is still in this record, and it's got other great jams like the Thin Lizzy-esque Out of Love Again and the gorgeous blues swing of Beautiful Girls. Honestly, that one's probably my favorite off this record. It's a wonderful little closing track, and Michael Anthony's vocal harmonies are particularly great here, though some of you with keen ears might recognize this song from another place. This song belongs to the gays. It's ours now. Thank you very much, Saturday Night Live. It is ours. We own this track. We'll let you borrow it if you're nice. Hey, there's a lot to love about this record, but I gotta stress, like I do in every How to Get Into video, that these aren't ranked lists. They're meant to highlight places in a band's catalog that are gonna be more accessible and memorable to someone who isn't immediately familiar with an artist. And this record, I mean, it's good, but I kind of forget this one exists. Real talk. Part of the problem is, well, death by comparison. This record is literally sandwiched between these two beasts. That's a tough act to have to play against, y'all. And also, this record just feels like extra slapdash and cobbled together, which it literally is. The band started recording this one 1 week after touring for the last record finished, and this record was fired out even quicker than their last one, finishing recording in under a week. The label basically just thought, hey, let's just do that same thing we did over again. It should work, right? But the thing with Van Halen 1... this record is lightning in a bottle. You're only ever gonna make one of these. Van Halen 2? It feels more like a B-sides or demo compilation to Van Halen 1. It feels like more of a companion case. In some cases, that's literally what this is. Some of the songs on this one were tracks they originally recorded for their demo with Gene Simmons. And at times, it just kind of feels like a lesser sequel version to Van Halen 1 more than it does its own thing. You liked Van Halen 1? Well, here's more of the thing you like. It's the Hangover 2 of Van Halen's catalog. Thankfully, it's not that bad, though.
Hey, Phil, look.
That was a bad comparison. I apologize. I know I'm probably being a little harsh to this one, but I don't know. I often forget it exists specifically because of that reason, and I know I'm not the only one, too. A lot of people like to talk this one up as a favorite, but go on pretty much any streaming service. Yeah, maybe you'll see Dance the Night Away if you're lucky, but you won't find anything else from this one. I see y'all. I totally see y'all out there. That mouth says one thing, but those streaming figures totally say another. I see y'all. Again, not a bad record at all. It's still a fantastic listen. It's 100% worth your time, and it wouldn't be in this section if it weren't. Trust me, people. But Van Halen... there's just so much great stuff out there when it comes to them. You really want to get those must-hears out of the way before you step into a record like this, because... the first album again, but a little lesser, can paint such a wrong color of what this band is like. Listening to this right after you listen to Van Halen 1 will make you think, oh, this band is just a one-trick pony. They just do the same thing over and over again. Okay, I get it. And they so weren't like that. Again, please do not think that this album is not worth your time, because it totally is. Eventually. I'd get at least a handful of those must-hears out of the way first, especially that first record. It is what it is. Great record, but you got a lot on your plate. I say finish that first. And fair warning, same goes for Fair Warning. Again, you see what I did? Do you see this? These are the jokes, people. This is what you come for. This is... One of these days I'll learn how to ad-lib. Ah, man, fair warning. Everyone forgets about this album. Poor thing. This album is great. It just doesn't get the love it deserves. The band were trying to continue on from the rough and tumble sound they built on Women and Children First. This was the follow-up to that album, and they do a decent job of it, especially with the opener, Mean Streets, the bouncy as fuck Sinner's Swing, the crazy shred flexing of One Foot Out the Door, and of course, motherfucking goddamn son of a bitchin' Unchained. I'm sorry, but not to put like too fine of a point on it, Unchained may legit be one of the best songs this band ever wrote. Eddie's riffing is absolutely on point. Dave is giving one of his most tight and exciting vocal performances ever. This one became a huge tour staple and a permanent fan favorite. Just a fucking amazing track from them. Seriously, Unchained alone is reason enough to buy this record. It's such a goddamn good song. It sucks that, it's on an album that most people don't, buy because, it's a great album, but man, Unchained just pushes it over the edge because it's such a good song, it's such good hooks, and such good stuff.
Come on, Crash, give me a break.
Hey, one break coming up.
No.
I'm sorry, I got lost in the moment.
I'm sorry.
Again, this record wouldn't be in this section if it weren't a very, very strong release, and it is. It's totally worth your time. So, why do people forget about this one? Well, again, the biggest problem when talking about this era of Van Halen is that the good stuff is just so damn good that even when they put out another decent album, it just kind of dies by comparison if it isn't one of the greatest albums ever made. And as good as Fair Warning is, yeah, it also has its rough places. For one thing, it actually shares a similar problem to Women and Children First, in that while many of the tracks are good, they aren't exactly cut out to be singles. I mean, Unchained is obviously a big front runner, but that was actually a follow-up single, believe it or not. No, the lead single to this one was So This Is Love. And
Well, my baby's on the corner and she's looking so fine. Never to get
it doesn't scream Van Halen to me, and this is definitely not the single I would have led off of this album with. I mean, Women and Children First. Fair Warning. Yeah, one of these things is not like the other. This was also the first record where Eddie's budding interest in synth music started to gradually nudge its way into the sound. The two closing tracks in particular really lay on the synths pretty thick, and while I usually love Eddie's little instrumental fuck-arounds, Sunday Afternoon in the Park... it's not one I come back to, not gonna lie. And this was also one of the first albums they released to kinda slump out, both critically and in sales. People had a harder time warming up to this one than their last three. But again, I can kinda see why. The album does have very, very strong moments, but it also has noticeable dips, a few experiments that don't work out terribly well. I'd say this was the first album they released that ever felt uneven. When this album does shine, god damn does it shine. Again, definitely a record you need to get to eventually. Again, the competition from this particular era of Van Halen does this album no favors, but you do definitely need to hear this one eventually. Just keep it into your pocket until you can hit the ground running. cannot get that from him! But the David Lee Roth era isn't the only one with some rougher gems in it. Hell, if I could use any term to describe the majority of the Sammy Hagar era, it'd probably be that. I mean, real talk. And people, just as kind of a heads up, believe it or not, I have albums from Sammy and Dave in every single category of this video. I also have a place for Gary too, but again, we'll get to that. I'm really not looking forward to when we get to that. That's not gonna be fun. Y'all already know that's coming, but I lost my train of thought. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, fuck! Yes, Van Halen's third album with Sammy, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. You get it? Because the first letter, those together, they spell. My God, these guys were such a dad band in the Sammy years. The albums became dad puns. They are such a dad band. Don't tell me this isn't even a dad band. But yeah, people, we got another lovely little gem here from the Van Hagar period. I can't help but feel like a lot of others would have probably put OU812 here, but we'll get to that. But my personal pick for this section has to be good old Fuck here. See, by the time the band had gotten to this record, they were pretty well entrenched in the Sammy era. One major complaint that the band was starting to get around this time, though, was that the synth-heavy sound that they'd been building since 1984, it kinda reached its expiration date. People were getting a little sick of the bleepy bloopy side of this band, plus by 1991, new wave was pretty much dead, alternative ruled the airwaves, and people wanted their music loud, hard, and heavy again. And that's what this album kinda represents. A return to form. This record, while not completely shedding the different skin that they developed over the years, did see a much more abrasive and in-your-face style. This was something this incarnation of the band had never actually done. See, the Van Hagar period, they never had their women and children first, at least up to this point. So in a way, that's what this album tried to be, just the album that proves they can still go hard. It opens really strong and viciously with the stomper Poundcake, a song so loud, crazy, and fucking doofy that it almost calls back to the David Lee Roth era. There's also Spanked. Yes, Spanked. A song about calling a phone sex line, Pleasure Dome, In and Out, Man on a Mission. I'm sensing a pattern here, are you? Man, in here I thought fuck was just a dad pun. I didn't think it'd be a literal theme. Honestly, I love this record specifically because of the sort of return to roots it represents. It's much more guitar focused than a lot of the Sammy stuff, and Eddie is putting out some of his most solid licks in years on this thing. The songwriting is more relaxed and chilled out as well. I mean, the album opens with Sammy calling pussy Poundcake. That's just like a wonderful play on words. Squish out of 10. See, Cherry Pie, this is how you do it. This album is fantastic. It's a great listen, a hell of a stomper, but no discussion of fuck is complete without the one track that basically defines the entire album. Right Now. Holy cow, Right Now. That opening piano riff just tells you everything you need to know. While this album is super silly in places, the band hadn't completely let go of that sense of maturity they'd developed over the years. And this song right here, it's them at their most put together, their most sincere, and their most genuinely thoughtful. Or maybe I'm just like super biased because this was literally the first Van Halen song I ever heard. Yeah, I'll cop to it. There's probably at least a little bit of personal bias in this one. 6-year-old me caught the amazing music video to this song on MTV, but after that, I was just instantly hooked. Maybe that's why I'm so forgiving of the Van Hagar era. They are basically what helped usher me into this band's music. But no, regardless of that, Right Now is an absolute triumph. Maybe one of the best tracks they'd ever write. It's the perfect blend of piano and guitar, heavy and serene, sincere and silly. It's the most balanced song this band would ever write. Way more than anything on Balance, weirdly enough, but I'm getting ahead of myself. This track was fantastic, and if you were alive at all in America between 92 and 93, and you remember the original run of Crystal Pepsi, yeah, you definitely remember this one, right? Outside of 5150, this is my favorite Sammy record. It had been a while since the band had gotten fun with us again, and damn it, they really brought another fun album that wasn't completely devoid of the stuff they'd learned along the way. It may not be perfect at all. If I'm being real, it goes on for way longer than it honestly should. A common problem as the years went on, and some of the silly parts don't really work all that well, but when your album is so good that, you know, a big, stinky commercial jingle sellout track doesn't spoil it, and is in fact one of the best songs, not only on this record, but on any record you've ever done, I'd say you got something special on your hands here. At this point of the video, I guess I need to quit stalling. Crash, you said you were a Van Hagar defender. What do you have against OU812? Nothing. I don't hate OU812. Again, people, this is a how to get into. Just because something isn't in must-hears or next steps doesn't mean it's bad. I'm just gonna keep hammering this into your heads until those comments that say, "Why hate album?" Stop coming. Stop making those comments and I'll stop going on these tirades, people. No, I don't hate OU812. It has some really standout moments. It opens strong with Mine All Mine, and When It's Love is another fantastic Sammy ballad, another one of their best. Finished What You Started is the band's first real dabble into country rock, and it's a cheeky bit of goofy fun, and Black and Blue is a decent bit of rough and tumble bar rock goodness. It kind of sounds like a Bad Company song that doesn't suck. I dig it. It's fine. It's fine. That's kind of my overall impression of this album as a whole. It's fine. Yeah, that's the thing about this one. It's fine. Just fine. For one, like I mentioned in the fuck section, God, that sounds like something else entirely, doesn't it? Please don't demonetize me, YouTube. By the time this album rolled around, these guys were really burying themselves deep into their softer, synth-heavy sound, and on 1984 and 5150, it was fantastic. But by this record, honestly, it was starting to get stale. It didn't turn them into the sellout soft rock band that their more avid haters said it would, but by this album, you really started to see the returns diminish on that particular style of Van Halen sound. And none of it was helped by this album's wonky as fuck production. That's another great thing about Fuck. After Dave initially left, the group had a falling out with longtime producer Ted Templeman too, and as a result, they would bounce between several different producers during a lot of the Sammy era. But for For Unwanted Carnal Knowledge, Ted actually got to come back and work with them, and I feel like that album was much more tight and focused as a result. This album, it really does have a lack of focus that's, a lot of the Sammy albums have, honestly. And this one in particular, because this album just straight up didn't have a producer at all. Sammy himself even said, the band pretty much produced the album ourselves, and we weren't producers, in the sense that we went in with an idea and told everyone what to do and took control. There just wasn't a producer. And you know, on this record, people, you really do feel it. The mix on this one is often very inconsistent, with weird elements being either too far in the front or tucked way too far in the back. Hell, Michael Anthony's bass is criminally quiet on this thing, something that's only gonna get worse with each passing album, sadly. And this was also the first record where another big, ugly problem with Van Hagar really starts to rear its head. Bloat. Another thing you just gotta love about the David Lee Roth era is just how crazy tight all of those albums are. All 6 of their first records clock in at just around 30 minutes, no fuss, no must, almost never any filler. Get in, shred minds, get out. All of their David Lee Roth albums are like that. Well, almost all of them. A part of that was simply because we were still in the vinyl era, but a bigger part of that was Roth and Templeman's philosophy of keeping things simple. Don't piss around, don't waste time, don't fuck with the formula. When those two left, however, that also roughly coincided with the popularization of the CD format. CDs could hold over 60 minutes of music. It gave the band a lot more wiggle room to play with, and they started to wiggle, baby. They started taking big advantage of it. 5150 wasn't too bad in that regard. It was longer than your normal Van Halen record, but hey, that one's also aces from back to front, so you barely even notice. OU812, on the other hand, yeah, I'm sorry, this is one of the first time we see Van Halen factor padding into the mix. It definitely has stellar moments on it, but there's also a lot on here that's just, okay, whatever. It exists, sure. This is definitely one of those albums that works better in pieces than it does as a whole. Very nice singles, but the deep cuts kinda leave a lot to be desired. That, plus the inconsistent production, just makes it feel all the more aimless and uncommitted. I mean, the CD version of this record is 50 minutes long, and man, I'm sorry, for all of its shining moments, this album does not need to be 50 minutes long. I mean, to be fair, Fuck was even longer than this, and a lot of the problems that were on OU812 do carry over to Fuck, but that album had a much clearer focus. It does work better as a whole. With Fuck, you'll put that record on and say, oh, I'll just listen to the songs I like. You'll say you'll just listen to Right Now, but you put it on, and 50 minutes later, you've sat through the whole thing. OU812, on the other hand, it's just like good, skip, good, good, skip, good, skip, skip, good, good, skip, 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 good, skip, skip. You know, it's not a terrible record, but man, is it spotty. Some of those spots are absolutely wonderful, but as an entire record, it genuinely is on the wonkier side, and when you're trying to convince people to give Van Hagar a shot, real talk, you've got a bit more of an uphill climb ahead of you here. I wouldn't call it bad, but its lesser moments do make me not want to recommend this one right away. Definitely not the worst they would ever do with Sammy. Again, OU812, it's fine. It's just fine. Let's just leave it at that. It's fine. I mean, hey, Van Halen were a kick-ass band, but you know, nobody's perfect. And they certainly weren't perfect either. Not with Sammy, and not even with Dave. Again, especially after Ed's death, I heard a lot of people just burst out of the woodwork to say, all of the David Lee Roth albums are perfect from back to front, 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10. And I'm sorry, I have to pull those people aside, sit them down, tell them to calm down. Okay, come here, come on, come close, come on. We need to have this talk, come here. 10 out of 10? Perfect runs? All the way around? Even Diver Down? You're gonna tell me Diver Down is a 10 out of 10? Really? Tell me Diver Down is a 10 out of 10. Do it. I dare you. Okay, I know I didn't exactly give the best first impression there, but even with this record, I wouldn't necessarily call it bad. It's still got that Roth-era sense of tightness, boogie, and fun to it. Their cover of Roy Orbison's Oh Pretty Woman is freaking fantastic, as is their cover of Martha and the Vandellas Dancing in the Street. That's a song that's been covered like a million different times, but their version is definitely one of the better ones to have ever been made. There's also another fantastic cover of The Kinks' Where Have All the Good Times Gone? That's super alright. There's also another wonderful cover of Do You See the Issue with this one already? Yeah. A lot of covers on this one. While it technically isn't a covers album, it's 12 tracks long and 5 of them are covers. That's almost half the record, and the album closer... That honestly feels more like a piss take than a cover. To their credit, most of the covers are very well done, but like, why on earth would you lay it on so thick? And again, why cover the Kinks again? You already covered the Kinks. What the hell is going on here? I'll tell you what's going on here. This record, it is not supposed to exist. Literally. After the guys finished the Fair Warning tour, they were absolutely exhausted. They'd been touring, recording, and working their asses off pretty much non-stop since Van Halen 1 blew up. After that tour, the original plan was to finally take a little downtime, vacation, and get some rest for the next record. But then Dave got the idea of just recording a quick little cover single so that they could have something out there in the wild in the new year so people wouldn't forget they existed, basically. But then Oh Pretty Woman started to climb the charts, and it started to become a big success, and their label got ants in their pants saying that they needed to strike while the iron was hot. They told the record they didn't want to do it. They said they were really tired, but the label kept pushing them and pressuring them, and eventually they just caved. Let's just do something. And I present to you, good people, something. Yeah, that's the thing with Diver Down. It really has that kind of low effort, low energy, kind of wiped out sort of feel to it. Because yeah, the band recorded it when they were completely wiped out. They didn't want to make this record. The label more or less forced them into it. It's definitely one of those albums that stinks of corporate obligation. Oh dear, how did a picture of this get in here? Uh-oh. And like, when you listen to this thing, you can really tell they weren't committed to it. It's a handful of covers, some random hijinks they would do in their live set just put to a recording, along with some super old stuff from their early years. Even the album art to this one is low effort. Oh god, our stupid album needs cover art shit. What are we gonna do? What's easy? What's cheap? Okay, sure, fine, whatever. Does that mean anything? Diver Down. Okay, fine. That's what the album's called too. We'll just call the album that too. Look, I really want to get this done before Cheers starts. I gave my vacation away to this album. Let me at least have Ted Danson. Fuck you, Pretty Woman. If an artist were to release an album like this today, they'd likely call it a mixtape or an odds and ends collection or something like that. This album just feels kind of fobbed off, but to their credit, again, it's still not bad. Hey, a lot of these songs are pretty good. They do a fantastic job with Pretty Woman, and original tracks like Secrets and Cathedral certainly have their charm. It honestly just speaks to how crazy good this band was during this era, that even when they had to release an album that just reeks of, ugh, do we have to? It's still solid and still very listenable. But again, this is a how to get into, and it's all about what kind of impression an album is going to leave on a first-time listener. Even if it has its moments, a covers album with a bunch of cutting room floor stuff all Frankenstein together to look like a legit record because of label bullshittery and politicking. I'm just saying, no matter what you may feel about this album in particular, that doesn't leave the best first impression. Just tell me Diver Down is a 10 out of 10 with a straight face. I dare ya.
It's okay. I'll do what I want if I choose. I can take the fall.
Oh boy. Now for the really hard part. People, like I've been trying to tell you here, no band is perfect. And even though Van Halen has a lot of good stuff, they aren't perfect either. And for as much as I've been doing to try to stick up for the Van Hagar era in particular, when it comes to balance, this record would mark the end of Sammy's time with the band, and man, what a damp squib of a record to end things on. But I kinda get why it played out like this. This record has a lot of problems, and a lot of those problems stem from the fact that a lot of the issues they'd been collecting over their years with Sammy, the wonky production, the goofy lyrics clashing with the more serious tone, and the ever-widening issues they had with bloat and filler, all of those things that were gradually becoming issues come to a big head on this one. This album is 53 minutes long, and people, it so does not have to be. Short version, this album is just chock full of filler. And it sounds like no one was having a good time recording this record either, to add insult to injury there. Again, we are at a moment where there was a lot of internal band tension, particularly between Sammy and Eddie. They'd been clashing creatively behind the scenes, and were getting to a point where they absolutely would not compromise with each other anymore. And as a result, a lot of weird stuff happens on this one. This album opens with a bit of Gregorian chant. There are 3 instrumental interludes that, yeah, Eruption this ain't. I'd also say this is probably one of Sammy's weakest albums lyrically as well. You really don't see a lot of people standing their ground for stuff like Big Fat Money or Amsterdam. Amsterdam in particular is a befuddling little song. It's this goofy as hell track about smoking weed and being an American bozo tourist in the Netherlands. Hey, fun fact about the Van Halens, they're actually from the Netherlands. Did you know that? Yes, actually. Alex and Eddie were born in Amsterdam and eventually settled in this place. And their parents are actually of Dutch and Dutch-Indonesian descent. They spent their entire adolescence living in Holland, and I'm sorry, but I just can't imagine this goofy idiot brain song about the most stereotypical thing you can do in the Netherlands was something they wanted to be attached to, but Sammy insisted on it, and Eddie and Alex Van Halen, 2 legitimate Netherlanders, are featured on a song that is basically the equivalent of
Popping pills is all we know. Inhales is all we know.
I mean, I don't know, Dutch people, y'all tell me how you feel about that, but even as an American, I'm listening to this and going like, could you not? You can really tell songs like this were just the result of Sammy and Ed clashing so ferociously in the studio. Fun fact, Eddie actually got sober for the recording of this album initially, but the sessions apparently went so badly that Eddie immediately started drinking again. And again, the wonky production does it no favors. Michael Anthony is yet again mixed out to the point where he practically may as well not even be there. This is an album where the inner band chaos ended up rubbing off on the music, and not in that 1984 way either. This album is very frustrated, exhausted, and at times even cynical. Not that it's completely unlistenable or anything. There's still a few decent jams here. My personal favorite, Don't Tell Me What Love Can Do, was actually written as a response to Kurt Cobain's suicide, believe it or not. That had actually happened in the midst of recording this one, and the story, when the news broke, actually hit Sammy pretty hard. He wanted to write a song about reaching out to help people who were struggling with suicidal thoughts. But Eddie butted his head into things and had him change a great deal of the lyrics and tone of the song because he felt like it needed more attitude. A song about Kurt Cobain's suicide needs more attitude? I don't even have like a snappy comeback to that, just like, no. I also personally enjoy Can't Stop Lovin' You. It's another classic Sammy ballad and another big fan favorite. But again, even this one has like a taint to it. This track is written from the perspective of Sammy's ex-wife, and this song is about how even though they're split apart, his ex-wife just can't stop loving him regardless. Okay, Sammy, you go ahead and tell yourself that, bud. Whatever works, dude. I mean, even this record isn't without its stronger moments, but man, do you really have to cherry pick on this one. It was a pain in the ass to record, and it was only exacerbated by all the infighting and conflict, the failure to compromise, and this terrible album cover. Look, I know the cover doesn't factor into the music whatsoever, but what the hell were they thinking with this? Gah! On the whole, this is just not a very good record. You can pretty much skip this one, unless it has a few tracks that you do like. Then it's worth picking up, I guess, but it is an entirely skippable record. You don't have to listen to this one. It has a few nice songs on it. I can give it a few small accolades for that. Unlike the follow-up, people, I do my best to present these How to Get Intos as fair and evenly handed as possible. I try not to throw in a lot of hyperbole or exaggeration. Belongs to the gays.
Squish out of 10.
One break coming up. I said try, because generally when I do these videos, I'm covering a band that I genuinely love, and I want to give them as much credit as I can possibly give. But I've never done one of these where a band had an album as bad as Van Halen 3. People, yikes. Just yikes. This record is bad. very bad, infamously bad. This is one of the most legendarily bad albums in rock history. Right up there with stuff like Lulu, Generation Swine, Everybody's Rockin'. With every other act I've done for this series, even their absolute worst stuff, more often than not, still had a lot to offer. Van Halen 3...
You got a mind,
complete turkey. I have almost nothing nice to say about this album, and you know, part of the problem of discussing this record in particular for How to Get Into is that I can only devote so much time to it. We have to cover the band's entire discography, and an album so befuddlingly bad as Van Halen 3 really deserves more than a short little 5 to 10 minute breakdown. And because I'm super pokey with my release schedule and this video almost blew up while I was making it, a lot of other people have beat me to the punch on this. I would recommend you check out these videos in particular. They cover the album in much greater scope than I have time to. There are a lot of people who've talked about this album. Look around, you'll find somebody who's covered it. I'll leave links to these specific videos in the description if you want to check them out. Hey, feel free. Good stuff there. But another problem with this album in particular also kind of rests with this, because you know what? When it comes to this record, I honestly don't have much to say that my counterparts haven't already discussed. I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, there's just not much I can say that hasn't already been said. This album is precisely as bad as you've heard it was. Eddie's playing and song construction are a car crash of misorganized overcomplexity. The production is hot, blaring garbage. The lyrics are inane, bizarre, and downright nonsensical, even by the near non-existent standards of this band. Eddie tosses a major foul ball by closing the album with a herpy-derpy ballad he sings himself. But even though Eddie is no singer, man, that's nothing compared to what they did to poor Gary Sharon. For me at least, it's Gary's voice that pushes everything off the cliff. I mean, you're hearing this too, right? I don't need to explain why this sucks. And of course, the big tragedy of it all is that Gary is actually a fantastic singer. Listen to literally anything else he's done.
more than words is all. There's a hole in my heart that can only be filled. I must be going now.
Yeah, you can tell the guy has a nice set of pipes. He's not necessarily a Sammy or a Dave, sure, but their voices. They were always a little weird to begin with, and hell, especially towards the end of the Van Hagar era, critics were always talking smack about how limited Sammy's range was, so hiring a guy like Sharon, whose pipes are obviously clear, flexible, and professionally trained, that could lead to some really fantastic stuff. Instead, they just made him sing like Sammy. Man, this record just makes no goddamn sense. There's no thread of logic as to why it turned out like this. At least with balance, its disappointing moments are a reflection of the inner chaos going on with the group. You at least understand why that album sounds the way it does. Why does this album have Gary Sharon singing like a broken air conditioner? Why do the lyrics sound like they were made by throwing darts at fridge poetry? Why the fuck did you even ask Michael Anthony to come back if you weren't even going to let him play bass? Okay, I have to do it now. Slight tangent, but Michael Anthony's bass work is legit one of the biggest reasons Van Halen's music is so good. Just laying that out there. Anthony contributed so much to their sound, but as the years went on, Eddie got more and more pissy towards him and kept writing him out of the mix. The band only suffered sonically the more and more they blocked him out of the room. And on this album, they basically turned Anthony into a glorified backup singer. That may be the biggest crime this particular album commits.
I don't know why they go after him like that. He doesn't deserve it. He's one of the greatest rock and roll bass players ever in the world. Michael Anthony is top 5 rock and roll bass player in the world. Any bass player will tell you that. Any musician will tell you that. Listen to him play on the circle. He ain't going boom, 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 boom unless it was called for. Michael Anthony is a bad motherfucker.
This is one of the worst records I've ever covered on a How to Get Into. The band themselves have pretty much always pretended this one doesn't exist, and honestly, you do well to do the same. It's a monumentally bad record, and it's not even bad in like a funny way or a so bad it's good kind of way. It's just kind of tragic and awful and sad and depressing, and it sucks that this was the record that Van Halen ended on. Or was it? A different kind of truth. Everyone forgets a different kind of truth. Like literally, hands up, how many of you either forgot this album existed or didn't know it existed at all? And be honest, be real with me, you don't get cool points for pretending you knew about this one. After Van Halen 3, the band basically went quiet for a good long while. Eddie in particular had a bit of a wilderness period where he spent some time doing other stuff here and there. He featured for a lot of other artists, composed some music for films, including one porno. Yes, really. But a lot of this time was sadly spent drinking and just generally not taking great care of himself. When Van Halen reunited with Sammy for a 2003 tour, Hagar painted a pretty grim picture of the shape Ed was in. That reunion falling apart was basically what convinced Ed to check himself into rehab and get himself cleaned up for good. In 2007, after Eddie came out of rehab, Van Halen actually got back together with David Lee Roth for a reunion tour of the classic Van Halen lineup. Almost. Another fun fact, Michael Anthony only heard he'd been fired from the band after reading about the tour online. No shit. At a press conference, Roth even went as far as to say,
This is not a reunion. This is a new band. This is a revision.
dick move. This incarnation of the band would actually feature Eddie's then 16-year-old son Wolfgang playing the bass parts. The original idea was just to tour, but after the shows ended up selling like gangbusters and went more or less okay, it was actually Wolfgang himself who actually was able to prod his dad into convincing the guys to record another full album. The band decided to start jamming again, and during this time, Wolf actually found a bunch of the band's old demos from their super early years. He actually pitched ways for the band to rework the old material into new songs. In 2012, the band would finally release their first record in 14 years, and well, here's the thing about A Different Kind of Truth. It's honestly pretty okay. The songwriting is way more tight and controlled, none of that chaotic nonsense mess that was all over Van Halen 3. The guys were clearly rested, refreshed, inspired, and in pretty good spirits for this one. There's a lot about this record that's honestly pretty solid, but if that's the case, why is it on this list? If I'm being totally honest with you, even though this isn't a bad record per se, it's still pretty far from perfect. For one thing, Wolfgang as a bassist, well, honestly, it's kinda hard to tell how good of a job he's doing. Again, because they mix the bass parts so far in the back that you can barely make him out. Old habits die hard, I guess, but even in the parts where you can hear him, he's not exactly doing much. Maybe Eddie just told him to play like that. Maybe he just didn't want to get in the way of the guys. I don't know, I wish there was more stuff from Wolf out there we could compare him to. Hang on, he was the bassist for Tremonti for a few years? Okay, what does that stuff sound like? Okay, yeah, so he can play. He's definitely talented. But for whatever reason, he's not really showing off on this record. That's definitely a noticeable problem, but, well, the most difficult truth about this record kinda lies with Dave. He's not pulling a Gary Sharon. Thank God. David Lee Roth was pushing 60 when they made this one. And you also gotta remember, most of these tracks were old songs written back when Dave was in his early 20s. And look, 40 years can do a lot to a person. I mean, they do their best to work around Dave's voice. They let him dip into his lower register a lot more. They dial back on the squeaks and squawks of the old days. It's about the best performance you could hope for, but it's still not great. Not to mention that a lot of the band's bad habits still haven't gone anywhere. The production is still super wonky, they're still pushing the bass way too far into the back, and this album is also just too damn long. This album is 50 minutes long, and no David Lee Roth era Van Halen album should be 50 minutes long. Dave knew better than that. Old Van Halen gets you in, gets you out, gets you satisfied. But when you're sticking around for it for too long, man, you really start to get bored. And honestly, that's this album's biggest problem, unfortunately. It's just kinda bland and forgettable. Believe me, there is a good reason you forgot this one existed. You wouldn't think that reading the reviews this thing got, but the honeymoon period for this one died off really quickly. It ended up getting passed over by the Grammys entirely, and USA Today, who initially gave it a 3.5 out of 4, reneged by the end of the year and called it one of the most overrated albums of 2012. These days, if you look up any of those Van Halen ranked lists online, you'll usually see this record towards the bottom of the list with a general attitude of, yeah, maybe we got a little too excited for this one. By this stage, the rust is just really starting to show. Unfortunately for this album in particular, again, it's death by comparison, people. Not bad if you grade it on a curve, but compared to the rest of Van Halen's work, and even worse, I have to compare it to the stuff they did with Dave. You see the predicament I'm in, right? By no means should you start your Van Halen journey here. Honestly, this one's also got a lot of flaws. A lot of flaws people were way too eager to gloss over back in the day. But here's the thing about this one. Even if it's far from perfect, I'm still glad it exists. I'm glad the guys, well, most of them anyway, were able to get back together for one last hurrah and put a proper cap on their legacy. Up until this record, their last hurrah was Van Halen 3, and yeah, I'm super glad that's not where things ended. And you know, when this album dropped, I kind of understand why the reviews were so crazy good, because it really did feel like the impossible happened. Dave and Eddie's falling out was the stuff of legend, and them recording and putting out one more banger album together felt like a pipe dream. But sometimes dreams do come true, and I'm happy we got to see the impossible happen one last time before the Van Halen story came to a close. And I'm glad Eddie got to finish things off on a good note. Not every band is lucky enough to have that privilege. Most bands don't, as a matter of fact. But Van Halen, they got to end things on their own terms. And in his wake, Eddie Van Halen left a mountain of records full of absolute gems. He reinvented the way people would play the guitar for decades to come, and he changed the shape of rock and metal permanently with his talent, drive, creativity, and his carefree good time spirit. Van Halen is an absolutely wonderful band with a lot of great music. And while it may not all be gold, the stuff that is golden lusters brighter than you can possibly imagine. And if you get the chance, please check out their amazing discography. If you didn't get the chance while Eddie was with us, hopefully this vid will help you honor his memory by checking out some of the albums that helped reinvent rock and roll as a genre. I'm Crash Thompson. Thanks again for watching. Go spin some Van Halen this week. I promise you'll enjoy yourself. But in the meantime, though, I will see you in the next video.